And I really felt as if, like, I'm not a yoga person, I'm kind of an imposter here in a way. But I think what you're talking about is not only the relationship between you and me and other people in the class, but also this relationship within your own body, which you bring us into.
All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. You may or may not know that I have an online yoga teacher training program, and a new group is forming to start in January 2023. And I was talking to my co-producer, Josh Citron, and we were talking about how it's November and the new group's starting in January. You got to start to mention it on the podcast. And you know, you're yoga teachers out there listening to this, a lot of you know how it's sort of uncomfortable when you have to promote yourself, but you get used to doing it because you kind of have to. If I don't tell you about the training, who's going to tell you about the training? So Josh had this idea that instead of me trying to tell you about the training, I record some mini talks with people who are in the training. And I started doing it already, and they're wonderful. I love them. It's way better for me to have the people in the training tell you about the training than me do it myself. So we're going to roll them out over the next few weeks, these series of mini talks. And today's will be the first one. It is with Jacinta. Hi, Jacinta.
How are you?
I'm okay. I just got back from the dentist. It was a drag. I really do not like the dentist. And you know, there was this like hygienist there who had a really light touch who I really liked, but she's gone and there was a new person and she was a little rough on me.
You poor thing.
But you know what? We're not here to talk about my teeth.
No, we're not.
And I really appreciate that you're doing this. You know, it has really been awesome for me to have you in the training this year because, as you've heard me talk about, I've had hesitations about doing an online training. And you and me, we had practiced together for some time before I decided to do the training. And you said something the other night that stuck out to me. You said that you had practiced with me before, but something about making the year commitment got you to do it more than at other times. And I'm interested in that. Why, what about making some commitment to doing this year-long thing got you to do practice more than before when you were just subscribed and coming to classes whenever you wanted?
Well, I'll go back a bit. I bought your CD and was practicing it a little bit. And then I said, no, I'm going to go for your live classes. And I joined the live courses, but I couldn't go on to the class. Didn't feel good enough to go into the class. And I was paying for it monthly. And I said, I'm going to stop. I'm going to leave it. So I left it. And then later on, actually after, like I was in bad enough pain, but after my knees went, which meant I was walking with pain in my knees, and it was kind of like bone against bone. So it was after that, when I could move even less, that I decided I better make, if I would go back to your class, but make a year-long commitment to doing your class, so that then I would go in. I'd make myself go in because I paid for the year, and that did work. And then when the opportunity for the training came up, I wanted to do that as well for more commitment, because I'm very good at leaving things, and I'm great with ideas about doing things, but not great at doing them, not great at following up. But I I certainly wanted to do the year in training because the benefit I was getting already, I felt it would multiply with the more, like it would make me do yoga even more, which it did.
I guess the other thing that's really stands out to me with you is that, and I'll just be frank about it, like I really didn't know if it was a good idea for you to do the training or not, because I knew the practice.
You said it.
What's that?
You said that to me at the time.
Did I?
Yeah.
I'm glad I was honest with you at the time. I didn't remember that I said that to you, but the truth is that I knew that the practice was accessible to you, and I had practiced with you and we had developed some rapport, and I felt that was like a solid ground for us in that. And I have this theory about teacher training in general, that really it's just a matter of yoga, that if someone comes to understanding yoga for themselves, then that's what you have to teach. And that it's not like the skill like other kinds of skills that you just train to do, but that it has more to do with relationship and kind of an exchange and transmission between people. So I felt like on that, I said, well, let's give it a go. If you're game to try, I'm game to try. And I guess I would be worried that you would feel, I don't know, intimidated because there was other yoga teachers there, or like even when we did all that kind of philosophy stuff too, like, and we looked at texts and stuff, and maybe there's a few points where it lost you, but really it didn't seem like it went over your head and you were able to grasp it. And that's like proof to me that it is just a matter of learning yoga, and not like you have to have some special physical abilities before you can do it or something.
Yeah, well, in the beginning now, I did think, before the teacher training, I did think, or before I was even doing your set practice on a regular basis, I looked at that practice on the CD and I thought, if someone is doing yoga for a couple of years, wouldn't this become really boring because it's quite simple?
Yeah.
And I thought I couldn't understand the same practice over and over and over again being stimulating. And I found that I was absolutely wrong in that doing the practice over and over again, it actually makes it way more interesting. And that leads into what you were saying about I was intimidated, not only by the teachers or the people who knew everything, but I'm not a yoga person. I'm not the build, I'm not the physical ability. I don't have the physical ability. I don't have the knowledge, even with the words, what they mean. And I really felt as if, like, I'm not a yoga person. I'm kind of an imposter here in a way. But I think what you're talking about is not only the relationship between you and me and other people in the class, but also this relationship within your own body, which you bring us into because of the movement and the breath, moving in the body or moving with the body. And I think I'm talking about the yoga now. I'm not really talking about the training.
You are, but that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. Talking about the yoga is talking about the training. Because the proof's in the pudding. Yeah. The fact that you taught like your first yoga class recently was so wonderful with your sisters. I mean, and that happened in a very organic way. And you coming in, I don't think that you would have thought that 10 months in you would have taught a class.
No,
would you have thought that?
No, I was even wondering if I'd still be doing the yoga, you know.
But I guess that's just it. It was through the yoga exchange. You know, I was just listening to your recent message and you were just talking about things coming to some fruition for you. And that happening in your own practice, even when it comes to overcoming your own pain and your own limitations. That's what's enabling you to potentially share in what you're doing with other people. And I think it feeds back on your own practice when you do that.
And as well as that, I think the way you have laid out the course and your philosophy towards your teaching has helped me tremendously, because I think I learn differently from other people. There's a couple of people in the class like that. I don't learn a lot through books. And your teaching was definitely from a personal point of view, anecdotal, is that the right word? Anecdotal, sorry.
Yeah.
Stories and I didn't feel I needed to know the names of everything or the philosophy on this or what year this started. And so there was no pressure on me in the year intellectually, although I did try, and my mind was certainly working.
You learned a lot of stuff. You know more than you think you know, I think.
Okay. Anyway, it's been really good. It's flown in now. It's gone very fast. As I say, the way you teach it, it's just very, I use the word easy, but I'd have to be careful on that word. You don't like that word.
No, well, I don't mind easy. Easy in that
you know what I mean.
I love what you're saying, because that was my whole intent when you decided to do it. I was like, I would like to engage in what I understand to be my role in facilitating yoga with people. And I think that that's potentially what leads to someone teaching, if it makes sense for them to do that. And you just become this perfect example. So
thanks.
How are you feeling as we are kind of winding down? We've got like 2 months left in the year that we signed up to together.
Oh, it's only 2 months left. Oh,
yes. Yeah, we're 10
I need
months
to
in.
learn so much more. I need to learn so much. I'm really only in the beginning of the learning, and I think the acceptance of that is part of the training. I think this thing of I'm glad it was a longer training. From what I've heard of other trainings, I'm glad it was a longer one, because we're dealing with people's bodies more than their bodies, their spirits and their psyche and their emotional, if you go into a class with people. So I don't think it's a small thing. So I don't think training should be a bit, too short. In the sense of you just move, you learn how to do the movements. Yeah.
I think that's why I decided to make it a year, stretch out the time and let enough life happen. The sun comes up and the sun goes down enough times that we have to really engage. So thank you so much, Jacinta, for engaging with me in the training. Thank you for taking this moment to talk to me about it. And I'll see you soon. We still got some practice to do, don't we?
We sure have. We have a lot of practice to do. Anyway, it's been great. Thank you.
All right. I'll see you soon. Take care.
Okay. Bye, Jay. Bye.
Bye. Okay. That was fun, wasn't it? It was for me. I hope it was for you. Having Jacinta in the training has been so fantastic. She's just this voice of real world, not full of shit. She always talks straight, and I found her to be such a wonderful check on me talking about yoga in ways that are inaccessible, And the most significant part about what she said just now, to me, was when she was referring to how the training is laid out and how that was helpful to her, and she didn't feel pressure on her, one of the big things I was most concerned about was I wanted the training to be able to fit to people's individual needs and to fit individual situations and to feel like a support rather than like a burden. So Jacinta was like a test case for me. And based on how it's gone, I'm feeling confident about what I've put together, and it's just been such a joy. So thanks again. Kudos to you, Jacinta. Today's episode is more following up on last week's with Tanis Fishman. I don't know if you listened to that. My guest is Jonni Pollard. And I don't know if you know who Jonni is. I was not aware of him until one of you, a listener of this show, emailed me and suggested that I talk with him. And I don't want to give too much away, but just to say that Jonni, he started this movement, I guess, originally, and then an app. And it was around the idea that bringing groups of people together to do meditation at the same time could affect the energy fields and frequencies on the planet, and was wanting to do scientific research around that to prove it. And all of it led to ultimately a meeting with the Dalai Lama in which the Dalai Lama convinced him not to do it. And the really crazy part of the story is why the Dalai Lama told him that he did not want him to do it. And we also do our best to see if we can put words to some of those things that generally don't have words when we're talking about consciousness and the way that practices bring us into states of consciousness. So it's definitely an interesting conversation. I was glad to have had it and happy to be sharing it with you today. Hello?
Hi, mate.
Hey, Jonni.
I'm so sorry I'm late.
No worries. Not at all. Not a problem. I'm glad you made it. Good to meet you.
Great to meet you too. How's it going over there?
It's going okay, all things considered. How about you? Everything okay wherever you are? I don't even know where you are right now. Are you in New York or are you in Australia? I don't know where you are.
Yeah, I'm in Australia. Okay. I'm in a small country town, a coastal country town in northern New South Wales called Mullumbimby. And it's a very special part of the world.
Oh, well, that sounds quite special. Let me just say, I am already recording, and if it's okay with you, I'd like to consider us having just begun.
Sure.
Cool.
Let it roll.
I really appreciate you just giving me some of your time. I don't think we've ever met. We don't know each other at all. And I appreciate you taking up the invitation and giving me this time today. I know what it is to give of your time. So thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure, mate. I looked into what you've been up to, and I think it's such a wonderful venture that you've taken on, and all the conversations that you're having and giving light to insights around the beautiful practices that we're deeply engaged in. It's what we need. So it's a pleasure to be a part of this thing that you've created.
Oh, very cool. Well, I appreciate you taking some time to look into this show. What brings us together, I often like to let people know like what motivated me to reach out to you. And, I think a lot of times I have my own threads that I'm pulling on and kind of tracking people down or finding out about people and then wanting to get them on the show. And then very often in the outros, I will say to listeners, hey, if there's anybody out there, if you think that would be good for me to talk to, please reach out. And so a lot of times when people will email me just wanting to respond to something, they will often say, oh yeah, by the way, I've listened to this teacher or this person, or I've studied with this person, and I think you would have a great conversation with them. And sometimes those notes there'll be a synchronicity for what's happening in the moment, and I'll just do it right then. Yeah. Sometimes, it doesn't resonate and I just put it to the side or throw it out. And then sometimes there's a resonance there, but it just doesn't feel like the right moment. And I put it into this folder. Like I have this folder of potential guests.
Yeah.
And so recently I just completed this whole kind of a pretty extensive series on meditation and on kind of, comparing and contrasting a materialistic and reductionist worldview to a more expansive consciousness-based reality worldview.
Yep.
And, I had people calling on to talk about morphic resonance and energy fields. And then I had a whole bunch of different people coming on to talk about different viewpoints when it comes to meditation, whether that was Buddhist meditation approaches like Zen and Theravada, or whether it was, more yogic traditions of like an ascetic kind of standpoint or a more tantric kind of standpoint. And it's pretty amazing, like how much meditation can be different things to different people. In any case, all of this is to say that I've been pulling on all these threads, and then I kind of went through all the people I could think of to talk to. And then I was like, oh, let me look in the folder. And, your name popped up, and I did a little checking into you. And there was a number of kind of immediate synchronicities that made me think it was a good idea for us to talk. And you can probably tell already from what I've said that we might have a lot of similarities, and you have a couple of experiences that happen in your life that I think are very interesting and telling that I wanted to pick your brain about.
Sure. Yeah. Any angle you'd like to take, anywhere you'd like to go on this conversation, I'm open to.
Very cool. Well, the first thing just for you to know is that I too was like a punk rock kid who from a young age felt like I didn't fit into the way society was or whatever, and I think that for me, yoga, I came to New York in the early 90s, and yoga was kind of a counterculture move because I didn't want to work in an office and I didn't want to do this. I remember having a conversation with someone and them asking me what I wanted to do. And I listed like 5 things I didn't want to do. Yeah. And they said, that's not what I asked you. And so I know you have a kind of a similar early story. And I guess I'm wondering, for me, I grew up in the suburbs of Los Angeles, and there was nobody in my life who would have been kind of like somebody I might have had an influence by in terms of sending me in a more easterly direction. Like nobody I knew even knew what yoga was. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious for you, I know at an earlier age, you were kind of sort of minded in this way, but was there anybody in your life or any kind of figures or early experiences that you look back on that really kind of stand out as, oh, that's kind of where I think it kind of started, or a moment that seemed to mark the beginning of that kind of path or whatever?
Yeah, not in any kind of obvious way in terms of like a definitive starting point. Who I am now and my sense of self is exactly the same as who I knew myself to be in my earliest memories. I've always had a sense of the sacred, the divine, and it's kind
Did you come from a religious family? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm curious about that.
No, I didn't. And the school it was interesting because the primary school that I went to was the closest one to us, which was literally across the road from our house, was a Catholic school. And I was, the family, as just a tradition, we all got christened in the Church of England, which is kind of like the rebellious Christian, if you like, Christianity. But and I didn't know anything about either doctrines. I went to the Catholic school, and then there was this place called a church that we'd have to go to every week, and I just had a very deep and innate connection with this sense of sacredness that was talked about and emphasized, but I always felt like my relationship to it was vastly different from everybody else's, or what appeared to be vastly different from everybody else's. And because I lived across the road from the school, I'm like, well, why would I only go there one day a week when I can go there every day? And so every morning, from as probably like from a 6-year-old. I would go to the church every morning and sit there and talk to God, and just very relaxed, just sit there. And I had an innate understanding of that, and that was all very normal for me. And it's only in retrospect that I go, oh, that's kind of interesting and beautiful and strange. That a 6-year-old would go and do that on their own accord, and but it was telling of who I am now, today. And so there was always that sense, and my parents never pushed it ever. They were never religious. It wasn't a subject that was ever really spoken about. There was no demand for me to go to church or anything like that. It was always of my own accord. And I was always terribly fascinated. And then, when we started diving into the Bible, which was a part of the education curriculum, I was terribly fascinated by this guy, Jesus, and the way he lived. And then I started creating a lot of tension between me and the school, and subsequently my secondary school, which was also a Catholic school, until I was asked to leave. And I was asked to leave because I was very rebellious, and I would always cite the teachings of Jesus and how the way the teachings would behave were contradictory to the way.
They hate that when you do that when you're a young punk. That's what I did. The same thing. I was always challenging my teachers and just being the punkiest kid ever,
Yeah, but I wasn't doing it to be a punk, I was just
it was honest. Yeah, it was honest questioning.
It's just like, hey, look, I'm just trying to get my head around what we're doing here, because you're saying this, but you're behaving like this. You're asking me to be like this, and I am, but then you're insisting that I conform in this way. And I just couldn't reconcile it. And it became pretty clear to me, even in primary school, it became pretty clear to me that I was going to have trouble fitting in with the world, and that I had to work out ways of making it work on my terms. And it was challenging. It was a great challenge, and there was a lot of conflict and a lot of resistance. And and coupled with lots of things happening on the home front, there's a lot of unrest there, and so it was like a perfect storm, if you like, to create a sufficient amount of dissatisfaction and unsettledness for me to want to turn my attention inward and inquire as to how I could resolve the unrest within me. And that ultimately led to a whole bunch of what would be described as, at least from the lens that I look through, yogic experiences, at a relatively young age, where capability of insight emerged, what felt quite unnaturally, but was very natural, but it felt unnatural at the time, which created what felt like great imbalances in my worldview, which was just a natural part of awakening, which led me to India, and at a pretty young age by myself, and where I began the beautiful romance with the Vedic tradition, and all the beautiful knowledge and insight that affords us.
Yes, I saw that you refer to the meditation that you do as Vedic meditation. And I guess I am kind of curious about your approach to meditation. As I said, I've had like a bunch of different people come on to talk about different viewpoints. And when you say Vedic meditation, I'm not exactly sure what that means, because there's a pretty wide scope of what's in the Vedas. I guess when you say Vedic meditation, are you referring to specific tradition? Are you referring more to like a philosophical viewpoint?
Yes, all of the above. So Vedic meditation is a brand, if you like, now of a particular technique that falls into the category of a being technique or automatic transcending technique, where you use a Bija sound effortlessly in the mind. You don't focus or concentrate on it. You just allow it to gently pulse in the mind. And what it does is it triggers a transcending effect where the mind forgets to keep track of what it's been conditioned to keep track of and slips between the cracks of that predictive thinking process into more abstract layers of thinking and awareness that ultimately leads to transcendence into the field of being, which is the realm of the self. And it's a completely non-intellectual process, completely effortless, very natural in its experience. And what it affords us is the direct experience of the self quite immediately. And once we've established that experience, then that becomes the baseline or the context by which we process everything else that's relative from that. And because when we're trying to discover ourself and make sense of ourself, if we don't have a model of the self, then what are we referencing in order to understand what the self is relative to what the self is not? Mm-hmm. The beautiful thing about this technique is that it delivers the experience of the self almost immediately. It doesn't matter whether you've had any experience or not. It's almost fail-safe in its.
You said Bija sounds. Is it Bija mantra sounds?
Mantras. Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't chant them out loud. You just hold them internally. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I wouldn't describe the process as holding them. I
don't know, because you said something about like not thinking about them intellectually. So I was trying to find a word to capture that.
Sure. But yeah. It's very nuanced in terms of the language that we use. Playing the instruction, and the term that we primarily use is effortless. That you're just allowing it to be there, almost with a sense of nonchalance. Like it's there, I'm thinking it, I'm allowing other thoughts to be there, and when I realize I've come off it, I just come back to it again, and it's quite extraordinary the power of these mantras, and to remind your listeners, mantra, manas comes from the word manas or mind, and tra, vehicle, a mind vehicle. A mantra is a sound that enables the mind to travel on its resonance to the source of where it emerges out of. Mantras are primordial sounds that emerge out of a subtle abstract field, and that is structured within the very nature, the very being of our consciousness. And we use the mantras as like a bridge, if you like, to deliver consciousness or awareness into those subtler dimensions of experience so that we can have the direct experience of it. And when we're having the direct experience of that domain, then consciousness is enlivened and awakened to that state, and we are in a realm of knowingness of that state. The word Ved means to know. So the Vedic science is the science of knowingness, knowing reality. And what we're interested in doing is having that direct experience of knowingness of reality. And that's what this particular technique does. Now, to frame the statement that you made, the word Vedic encompasses pretty much everything. It's huge. So once we've established the self through this practice, and then there are a myriad of other practices and a myriad of different sequences in which we can practice them to elicit a particular consciousness experience, depending on what one is desiring. Now, if you're under the tutelage of a very enlightened guru, then they will generally specify the sequence in order to awaken your natural ability, your natural talent, spiritual talent, until such time as you're self-sufficient and that you can cognize that for yourself. And I've been very fortunate to sit at the feet of great masters that have been very helpful in providing sequences for me that have led me ultimately to that state of self-sufficiency to determine what's most appropriate now.
Well, I really appreciate this pointing to the realm of knowingness and the self-sufficiency that you just came to, your own discernment and ability to determine for yourself, which seems to me an admirable and important place to point to. I guess what I'm curious about is one of the things that we talked a lot about when we had all these conversations about meditation was sometimes people call meditation like a practice. Sometimes it's more thought of as a state. And so some people will talk about how when you're in a state of meditation, or when you actually experience meditation, it's not a doing. It's not like a thing that you're doing. So there's the techniques, like you're saying, there's kind of need something to hold on to sometimes. And you were kind of talking about being nonchalant about the form being there, but not being too tightly held to it, which I completely understand why that would be the case. Because if you're tightly held to the technique, then there's not the room for whatever else might occur. So I guess I'm curious about that. What do you think the relationship of like form or technique is to where that technique leads to? Or is there another way that you might articulate it?
No, I frame it that way, except I would say that they're not mutually exclusive. You know, we have a technique to lead us to the experience. And so we practice a technique until that technique elicits the experience, right? You know, so we're moving from, and why do we meditate? We're moving from one state of mind, a conditioned state that is not satisfying to us. There is some yearning, desire to experience something more of ourself. We have some intuitive impulse that there is something deeper, more expansive, more dynamic, more complex, that reveals a deeper nature that gives me greater capacity to be more expressive of that impulse, and for that expression to materialize in some way that's deeply satisfying and fulfilling, not only to myself, but to everybody around me. So that would be a reason why we'd want to meditate. And so we accept that I'm in a conditioned state right now that I'd like to alter. So I apply the technology of meditation, a technique, you know, whatever it may be, with the hope that it will elicit an experience. And what happens is, through practicing the technique in the same way that ice turns to water, that turns to gas, you know, the meditation technique turns into the experience. So the rigidness of a practice that might be in its ice structure, through the practice of it being with the ice, the slow warming up of our being, of our underlying divine consciousness, slowly starts to melt the ice and turn the technique, the structure, the form, into a fluid state, and then we become the state. So one leads to the other, in my opinion, in my experience. And so we don't need to get too definitive about, you know, technique versus non-technique. You know, in my opinion, it's, you know, one will ultimately lead to the other, and let it happen naturally.
Oh, I like that very much. I think that it's well said. And even in the sense, like the metaphor of the ice, in the sense that at some point you need it to be like ice, but as it becomes integrated into you, you don't need as tight a structure, because it's more fluid and more part of who you become and who you are and what you know to be true as your sense of self, as you're saying.
Exactly.
And then that is the warming of the ice, and it becomes fluid like water. I really like it. I think that's well said.
And they, you know, we're very complex beings. You know, we can have on the surface of ourselves ice, and that ice then, through its layers of increasing warming up, can become slush, that then becomes more of a sleet into a liquid, that is cold currents, that as we go deeper and deeper becomes warmer and warmer and warmer, you know. And so, and what we're talking about here is oceanic consciousness, where all the layers simultaneously, we're the surface layer, which might be ice, and then we are the deepest layer, which might be really warm currents, like, and all of them are existing simultaneously. So the mind is very much the same. We can have very structured mental process that acts as like a container for a more abstract, fluid state of consciousness to operate within that structure. They're not mutually exclusive.
No, they're not.
What we need to do is hold the vision of our complexity, and that vision appears when one starts just having the experience of the layers all operating simultaneously, where we're not trying to contain ourselves in one realm or another and go, no, this is it. I have to eradicate the surface level structured rigidity in order for me to have this more free-flowing, organic, present moment awareness state, uninhibited by the habit of needing to structure and control.
Mm-hmm.
Once one acquires that deeper realm, then that deeper realm starts to influence and recontextualize the old tendencies of the mind. We don't necessarily completely rid ourselves of the old tendencies of the mind. It's just that the old tendencies of the mind start to be rendered as tools useful to that deeper nature.
Yeah, I get that. I think this idea of holding a vision of complexity is interesting in that it's also a unified whole. It's the paradox of a unified whole that has this complexity to it. Mm-hmm. I guess, you know what, I am also curious because I did a little listening to your podcast, and I was very intrigued by you creating one of the first meditation apps, you know? Yeah. And that the kind of, you talked about the motivation of that being like this study in TM. And I actually had some guys on the show who talked about that study, if I recall. These TM guys, they had a book called The Coherence Effect.
Yeah.
And they came on and talked about this big study that was done. Maybe you could say something about that for people listening who maybe don't know of you. You did kind of create one of these early meditation apps. And I'm curious as to, you know, the kind of motivations and what your vision was for that when you started it.
Yeah, well, it's pretty much the same, but we've kind of just adjusted our sort of strategy a little bit. It was inspired by the early studies that were done by the TM org in the 90s, where they were attempting to quantify the collective effect of coherent consciousness generated when people are practicing that particular technique, the transcendental meditation technique, and specifically the CITIS program, which is a sort of a dynamic consciousness process generated after a meditation practice. And what they were seeking to do was to...
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.